strategic, empathy, positivity, woo, and maximizer. Around where I work, I go by Dr. Paul. This is Paul Porter. And my biggest aha moment came when I used to be a superintendent. And I realized because of my strength of woo and positivity, my best way to run meetings was by treating them like training sessions.
I'm Darren Verasami,
I'm Brandon Miller,
and this is the Strengths Whisperer.
the show empowering leaders to create, build, and sustain great places to work. In this episode, we have Dr. Paul Porter. Welcome to the show, Paul. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Paul, as we call you at 34 Strong, welcome as one of our first Strengths Whisperers joining the Strengths Whisperer program. Tell us a little bit about your strengths journey.
Strength came along at my just the right time for me because I've always been very interested. I think it's because what I didn't know at the time is I have positivity so high. And I've always been interested in a concept called positive intent. So one day, I think I probably heard Brandon speaking, or I went to a meetup about 34 Strong and learned about strength. And it seemed like a perfect kind of coming together of what I believed in my heart about people, along with some practical ways to implement and use those kind of things. So that's how I started. And I went through and was certified by 34 Strong in this area. And then I got even more interested and decided to become Gallup certified. So since then, I started using a lot of strengths in private practice and was lucky enough to then come on to 34 Strong, where I can really apply strengths in a long-term fashion to organizations.
You started to mention a little bit about your previous careers. For the sake of our listeners, give us a little rundown, different things that you've done in your career.
Well, Brandon, I'm very old, so that might take a while. But when I first graduated from college, I thought I maybe would become a doctor, but I got a job at UC Davis being a dorm resident and resident. And so I got so into people that I thought, maybe I should do something different. Then I became a teacher. Then I was a school counselor for a while. And I became an elementary school principal and then a director of special education for a school district. And then I really lost my mind. And for 17 years, I was a school superintendent in a couple different places in California, and then was a professor for 20 years teaching courses in leadership. And now I work at 34 Strong. So I've always been interested, Brandon, in that interface between leadership and psychology and how to work with people. That's always been what's fascinated me. And that's how I've kind of come down the road.
I have your top 5 strengths in front of me: strategic, empathy, positivity, woo, and maximizer. So you just mentioned positivity at the front end of the show. Tell me a little bit about that number one strategic strength.
Well, that's one. Until I got really into strength, I didn't really have a label for it. I found myself, Brandon, loving, when I go to the show, I love the first part of a movie where they're laying out how things are interconnected. Okay. Who might be the murderer or whoever. That fascinates me, trying to figure that out in different courses of action. When it comes to the action part of the movie where they, shoot them up or whatever they do, I lose interest. But that was my first inkling. Hey, that's why am I so interested in the planning, the different paths you can get? Or if I'm out driving in the country, I'm thinking about 4 different ways to go. And if this doesn't work, I'll try this. So I began to realize that that was a potential strength for me, was the ability to see bigger pictures, put things together, and look at alternative routes for things. So once I realized that, which I think is part of the whole strengths journey, I started more consciously trying to use that in my works day to day and in my personal life. Before it was just like, well, that's interesting. You're kind of strange, Paul. And then it became, I'm going to use this.
This is a strength that you and I share in our top 5. I've heard strategic referred to as the intuition strength, and you were describing it really well. Those of us who can start to watch the show and we start to piece together what's going to happen based upon what we're seeing. And some have described it as instinct thinking or gut thinking and trusting that if I don't know the way will appear to me in time. And I'm curious for you how you have grown to trust your instincts, how you've grown to trust your intuition.
What a great question. For a large portion of my career, I've been working to train or educate people who want to become leaders or administrators. And one of the things I always tell them is if you sense something is out of place, something isn't working, something is going wrong, you need to trust that because that's one of your greatest tools to use as a leader. Now, it doesn't mean it's always right. That's where you got to check on yourself, right? But if I have an instinct now more and more and more, I count on that instinct as very valid and it allows me to ask more annoying questions, as you know, as my boss. So when I get an instinct, I'll trust that it really means something, and it's led me to some of my biggest growths in my life and also a lot of my successes as a professional. Trust your instincts kind of an old saying, but it's taken more meaning on for me as I've become a leader.
As I've talked to many leaders who share this strength with us, it's one of the top 5 most common strengths in the world after 28 going on 29 million participants in Clifton Strengths. And with it, something I love to ask a high strategic is when you are told no, it can't be done. It can't be done, Dr. Paul. No one can make this happen. What happens to you when you're told that?
Well, I don't have competition, so I don't want to prove them wrong. I just immediately, it's strange, Brandon. I will start thinking about 8 other ways to do it. Ways to go around it, to do it in a different manner, to have it interpreted differently. All those kind of things just start firing off in my mind. And it's funny too, if you look down on my strength list, it's not too low, but I've got analytical in my top 10, I think. What I've learned is that my instincts can often, if I explore them enough, be backed up with intellection or ideas and things like that, more concrete stuff. So maybe as I've matured, I've gotten how to link those two. So I'm not just a walking instinct.
Good. So you've learned to balance your strategic,
Maybe I'm in process.
growing as we all are. And so, friends, again, this is Dr. Paul Porter. He is the Director of Learning and Development at 34 Strong. He is working with leaders who are undertaking the daunting task of being people first and focused on engaging their people, developing their people. And so, Dr. Paul, for the purpose of this podcast, where we bring on people first leaders that are looking to leverage their strengths in order to be more effective as leaders, what are some tips or tools you've picked up along the way that leaders can build on this idea of being great leaders who put their people first?
One of my favorite sayings, Brandon, is you lead with who you are. So one of my biggest tips is that if you're going to become a great leader, you better keep working on yourself. A lot of training programs try to teach techniques where you don't also look at yourself a little bit. So that would be one of my hints to current and aspiring leaders is to keep looking at yourself, keep seeking feedback, keep being willing to look at your own foibles and things like that because it's really important. Another one that we've already mentioned, Brandon, would be trust your instincts. They're telling you something. And then I guess a third one, if I can name 3, would be it's all about people. I don't care how good you are with technology or process, or facts, if you don't have the people stuff down. Anthony Muhammad says, culture eats structure for breakfast every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. And jumping off that quote, when we think about culture, I know and you know that you are in the midst of helping to build culture into some challenging areas, organizations where culture up to this point may not have been a point of emphasis. It may have been more around performance and progress and reaching standards and serving constituents. And people can take a back seat when progress and performance are the priority. People begin to feel the wear and tear of that pull. And so, as you're working with leaders and you're working with teams, helping to build a healthy and strong and vibrant culture. What are some things that you're finding that leaders these days can be thinking about responding to, resources perhaps that they could access to help them along this path?
Well, you and I both work in the area of culture and engagement. And I like to tell leaders they are the chief engagement officers for their unit, for their company, whatever they happen to be in. And that it isn't, we call these things soft skills, but they're not. If your culture, if your engagement isn't being built, then the other things don't work, and they're not separate. This is one real helpful thing to all your listeners, I think. The more you work on culture and engagement and how you treat people, the more hard line, bottom line kinds of things, those will go up tremendously. So we need to stop this separation between hard skills and soft skills. That's so artificial and kind of outmoded.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. And when we think about Dr. Paul's strengths, again, strategic, empathy, positivity, woo, and maximizer. Dr. Paul, when you think about your best work, the times when you really feel like you're in the zone, you're having the greatest impact, you're seeing the fruition of these measured strengths that helps you to understand these are the patterns of behavior that will likely most often produce your forms of behavior, how you think, how you're going to feel, how you're going to relate to people. If you wouldn't mind, take us through a little walk of how some of them show up. Maybe not all five, but just how some are showing up on those best times when you're doing your best work.
When I feel that I'm at my best, it's when somehow I get to combine the strategic thinking, where are we going, very thoughtfully, et cetera, along with the development of and inspiration, hopefully, of people. So it's kind of when I get a chance to balance that strategic along with being able to use empathy and positivity and woo with people, then I feel like I'm in the zone. So if I'm just sitting in a room strategically planning, that's not very satisfying for me. Or if I were just doing coaching all day, I would like it for a couple hours, but not in the long run. I want to feel where those intersection of those things. And with my woo, I'm a bit of an entertainer. So I need to feel like I'm entertaining and keeping people involved. That's important for me. Sometimes it gets in my way, that need, but it's when I'm at my best, I'm doing both of those and balancing those things.
Excellent. If a leader listening today wanted to, they're weighing, should I learn my strengths? Is this something that would help me? Is this something that would promote well being, promote engagement, benefit? What would you tell that leader as to why learning their strengths could have such a powerful impact upon their effectiveness?
Using my strengths, I probably use a dual approach. I'd probably have a personal plea and a business side plea. My personal plea would be until you know yourself, you can't really work with others very well. And strengths is a great way of learning about yourself. There are other ways, and I don't want to ever discount those, but strengths gives you a picture of yourself. But the really cool thing about strengths, it isn't just a naming kind of game. That once you know what your strengths are, you need to take it to the next level, which is to work on and enhance those strengths for the betterment of the people around you. So I would tell them by learning your strengths, you'll know better what you have to give to people. You know where you can invest your energy to get even better results. So there'd be a results and a self satisfaction part to that. And I think when I define the role of a leader, I would say your main job is to help other people discover and then use what they're naturally good at even more. And if you know your strengths, you can do that better.
Help your people to discover and use what they're naturally good at. Listening today to Dr. Paul Porter, we got to hear about the strategic strength. We got to hear about applying strengths to leadership and to developing a strong and healthy culture and building engagement while also building yourself as a leader. Dr. Paul, if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about what you're doing at 34 Strong, where could people find you?
You can go on the 34 Strong website, look me up there, or you can email me also at Paul_Porter at 34 Strong. superintendent@cliftonstrengths.com. And we will write you back. We do this, it's our job, but we also love to do it. So if you need a resource, want 2 minutes of advice or something, happy to write you back.
Dr. Paul, thank you for joining me today on this show. And listener, are you ready to discover your strengths, to accelerate into life like Dr. Paul has? We believe in this path so much, we are offering our listeners the opportunity to discover their top 5 Clifton strengths. Email me at Brandon, that's Brandon, at 34strong, the number 34, the word strong.com, with the subject line top 5 to request your Strengths Finder code. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of the Strengths Whisperer. What did you take away from the conversation with Dr. Paul? We'd love to know. Just email us at Brandon at 34strong.com. Again, if you're ready to discover your top 5 strengths, include top 5 in the subject line. Thank you, Dr. Paul. And thank you so much for joining us on the Strengths Whisperer. See you soon.